So Tulsi Gabbard is standing up, and boy, she's taking it. She's taking it hard. She's taking it hard. In fact, I'm going to show you now. Phil Donahue. Now, a lot of people don't know this, so I want to tell you. In the run-up to the first Iraq or the second Gulf War, which was the Iraq War in 2003, Phil Donahue had a show on MSNBC. Now, Phil Donahue had the most highly rated show on MSNBC. And what they would make him do was they would make him, if he was going to have someone on to talk about the war and they considered them to be anti-war, he would have to have two people on to counter that one person. Two people who were pro-war. That was the rule at MSNBC. And Phil Donahue said that they counted me as two liberals. They counted himself as two liberals.
That's the fairness doctrine when you're owned by General Electric.
Yes. So for every Phil Donahue, they had to have two conservatives. So if he was just doing a show, he had to bring out. So that's just amazing. So then what happened was he got fired because he was vocal in questioning the run up to the Iraq War, because he lived through Vietnam and he lived through the first Gulf War, and he knows that these wars are BS. And so he questioned the narrative, and everything, you're a Saddam, everything they're doing to Tulsi Gabbard, they did to him, right? Except worse, they fired him. They literally fired Phil Donahue, and they said they fired him because he had low ratings. Except he had the highest rated show on the network at the time. So is that a conspiracy theory? Do you think they fired him because he was against the war, and they said he had the lowest? So this is how you know when they're liars, because they're actually conspiring to screw progressives. Anti-war voices. The corporate news actually conspires to fucking screw anti-war voices. And so Phil Donahue got fired. They said it was for low ratings. He had the highest rated show. And then a little while later, guess what was revealed? There was a memo came out from the top brass at NBC that said Phil Donahue being against the war is a bad look for us, especially when we're selling war. And we make a lot of money off of war, because they were owned by General Electric at the time. And General Electric makes, their biggest customer was the Defense Department. Donald Rumsfeld was General Electric's biggest customer when Phil Donahue was talking against the war. So they had to shut him up, and they fired him. And then it got revealed through that memo. Nobody ever talks about that. And that's how you know guys like Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow, fake tough guy Lawrence O'Donnell, and Chris Matthews are all compromised. And their integrity has been compromised. How do you know that? Because they never bring that up. They never talk about, and they have no problem working for an organization that fires people for telling the truth about war. And we're in the middle of 8 wars right now, and Chris Hayes has to light off a fire rocket to let everybody know I talked about Yemen for 2 minutes. Here's Phil Donahue from 2013. He was on Democracy Now!, and he was talking about this. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it's happening again. Right now. It's happening right now. Tulsi Gabbard is speaking out forcefully against the Venezuelan coup and our involvement in it, and Syria, and all of our wars in the Middle East. And she's getting smeared like they smeared people who were against the Iraq war. And here's Phil Donahue to tell you about it.
It happened to me. The biggest lesson, I think, is how corporate media shapes our opinions and our coverage. This was a decision, my decision, the decision to release me, came from far above. This was not an assistant program director who decided to separate me from MSNBC. They were terrified of the anti-war voice, and that is not an overstatement.
Terrified of the anti-war voice, and that is not an overstatement. Terrified. Terrified, like worried, like, oh my God, how do we handle this guy? Phil Donahue's telling the truth about war. How do we handle Jesse Ventura? They're going to tell the truth about war. What do we do? Well, first of all, you fire him, and then you make sure you never hire anyone like him again. And they did. Rachel Maddow has been completely co-opted by the military-industrial complex. She now chairs on war. So does Chris Hayes. So does Chris Matthews. He always did. So does fake tough guy Lawrence O'Donnell. So here, back to this. They're So when you see them coming so whoever the establishment is attacking the most, you know that's who they're afraid of the most. So it used to be Bernie. Now it's Tulsi Gabbard.
Anti-war voices were not popular. And if you're
they're not popular now. Look what they do to anybody who's against the Syrian war or even Venezuela. You're a Putin puppet. You're a Putin puppet. You're a Russian. Everybody who deviates from the narrative is a Putin puppet. Everybody.
You certainly don't want an anti-war voice on a cable channel that you own. Donald Rumsfeld's your biggest customer. So, by the way, I had to have two conservatives on for every liberal. I could have Richard Pearl on alone, but I couldn't have Dennis Kucinich on alone.
Wow.
I was considered two liberals. It really
couldn't have on Dennis Kucinich for an interview on MSNBC alone because that would break the rule. Now you're being too biased. Phil Donahue just said I was considered two liberals. So they had a math equation for how they would stack his show. And so if he was on by himself and you want to have on a guest, he would have to have on a conservative and then another conservative before he could have on another progressive or anti-war voice. So you'd have to have on, do you see what this is nuts. This is MSNBC. This is what Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow go along with without question, and they never say anything publicly about it. This is what happens over there. I'm not making it up. And you know it. You know that's why rooms full of people chant CNN sucks on the left and the right. And they could do it about MSNBC too. I'm gonna try to start some MSNBC sucks this election cycle. I'm gonna go to some of those rallies for Tulsi and Bernie. I'm gonna try to get an MSNBC sucks going. We'll see what happens. Here, let's go.
It doesn't flow as easily.
I know
CNN
sucks.
That's just like, or even Fox News. That's like right off the tongue. Like those reasons.
MSNBC. How about
Comcast sucks? There we go.
How about that?
It's funny almost when you look back on how the management was just frozen by the anti-war voice. We were scolds. We weren't patriotic. American people disagreed with us, and
it's exactly what they're doing to Tulsi Gabbard right now. That's exactly what they're doing to anybody who stands up against this. This is what the exact same thing they did. That's what I'm saying. It's the exact same playbook. The only difference is now they'll kick you off Twitter if you go against the Syrian war. They'll kick you off Twitter and Facebook now if you speak up.
We weren't good for business.
You know, I had this unusual experience.
Okay, so watch this. One time, Amy Goodman, and this is why you got to tip the hat to Amy Goodman from now until in perpetuity. Because she got on. This is what I would do if I got on MSNBC, which is why they'll never have me on MSNBC. Whoever you see on MSNBC, you know what they know about that person? They know that person isn't ever going to say anything that upsets their corporate masters. So if you see someone who calls himself a progressive on MSNBC, he's been corporate approved and he knows what not to say. He'll never say this. Watch this.
I want to congratulate you, Chris, on 10 years of MSNBC, but I wish standing with you is Phil Donahue. He shouldn't have been fired for expressing an anti-war point of view on the eve of the election. His point of view and the people he brought on were
I don't know what the reasons were, but I doubt it was.
I don't know what the reasons were, but I doubt it was that, he said. An company man till the day he dies. Chris Matthews is a company man till the day he dies, in the words of Bill Hicks about
Yeah, just a point of reference. Chris Matthews is surprised when he hears that priests have raped children.
Yeah, Chris Matthews, that was the guy who missed that story. I was shocked to hear it. There was a guy standing across the street from his office as he went to work every day saying, Catholic priests raped me, and he ignored him. Then never interviewed him, never had him on a show, never. And then when it all broke, when other reporters actually had courage and told the truth about the Catholic Church, then he was like, oh, nobody knew.
I had no idea. But you in comics were doing jokes about it since the 80s?
Yeah. So here is Chris Matthews getting his ass handed to him by Amy Goodman over at Phil Donahue's firing. And here, watch him live.
You, Chris, on 10 years of MSNBC, but I wish standing with you is Phil Donahue. He shouldn't have been fired for expressing an anti-war point of view on the eve of the election. His point of view and the people he brought on were
I don't know what the reasons were, but I doubt it was that.
Well,
and so when Chris Matthews was like, well, you're never, ever coming on this show again. And she didn't. That was that. Watch this. Watch how someone else cuts her off, too.
have the NBC memo. That was a secret memo that came out that said they didn't want him to be the face of this network, an anti-war face at a time when the other networks were waving the flag.
I think you might talk about
Phil Donahue is a great
remember
patriot.
me when you answer.
I said there, Phil, you were a great patriot. We did have the.
So that's someone with balls. Chris Matthews is a gutless wonder. A company man till the day he dies. And that's what's wrong with corporate news. They'll never tell the truth. They didn't even tell the truth about why they fired Phil Donahue. So Chris Matthews is willing to lie to you on his own show about stuff. And we all know he's lying, and you still listen to him? You still don't? Why would you get your news from a fucking news network that you know fires people who tells the truth about war? Why would you get your news from a news network that fires people who cover progressive politicians? Why would you get your news from someone who goes on those shows and is welcomed on those shows? Here's more. Here's a little bit more.
And Phil, the irony that MSNBC now is supposedly this liberal, liberal network now. That you wonder though if another move to war came, how liberal it would remain.
Well,
This is 2013, and he's giggling. If there was another move for war, you wonder how liberal they would be. Well, guess how liberal? Here's NBC News. The Russian propaganda machine that tried to influence the 2016 election is now promoting the presidential aspirations of 2020 Democratic candidate Tulsi Gabbard because they are scared to death of the anti-war voice. And she brings the anti-war voice together, and that scares the crap out of them. And they can't fire her, so NBC News does a McCarthy smear at the top of their lungs. And you know what this article is based on? NBC News is basing this from a group called New Knowledge. They're a company that got kicked off Facebook for doing the exact thing they're accusing Russians doing. They created fake Russian bots. They got caught doing it. And what they'll do is they create fake Russian bots, and then they sell you the solution. They have a solution to fix it for you. They got caught doing that in Alabama's race. They still run this article on those people who are discredited. They got kicked off of Facebook for it. So these are grifters. They're basing this thing on a grifter's report, which was completely fabricated. That's what NBC News does. That's not a real news story. That's straight up 100% propaganda. That's what NBC News does. And if you know people who get a chance to go on NBC News and they don't bring this up, well, then that's all you need to know about them. How about people who have their own news shows who don't even cover this? That's all you need to know about them. We're announcing our live dates for 2019. We're going to Chicago and Portland, Seattle, New York, all over the country. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our tickets to all our shows. It'll be right underneath there, too. Please become a patron if you like our content and help support the show. You can become a patron for $5 a month, and we give you hours of bonus material. And make sure you're subscribed. They unsubscribe people every day. I'm not kidding. Make sure you're subscribed and click that bell so they give you a notice when we drop a video. It's the only thing we can do to fight back against the bastards. Thanks for your support.